Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about critical race theory. So we have moved out of the idea of colonies and post-colonial relationships, and we're talking very specifically about American racial inequality. Critical race theory is created at first by law professors in the late 1970s, early 1980s, who are interested in the idea that despite the fact that in the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement was successful in getting our government to change laws um, to make political rights equal for all people. So it's fantastic, at least based on race. Uh, and yet, around 1980, we're still seeing disparities in income based on race, wealth based on race, incarceration rates. If all things were equal, if the civil rights movement and the civil rights legislation of the 60s had really worked, what we would expect is you wouldn't see differences in the median incomes of white people and black people and Latin American people or any other racial group. If all things were equal and our society was not turning out racial inequality, then we would see complete equality. Incarceration rates would be the same for white people and black people and all racial minorities. And the reality is those things are not true. We have differences in income, incarceration rates, health outcomes, housing, educational opportunities. All of these things, when we look at the outcomes, we see racial differences, which suggests that we've got racism baked into our society in a fundamental way. Critical race theory says, okay, so let's try to understand that. Now, I'm recording this in April 2021. So this is just a few months after the Trump administration left office. The Trump administration came to a point where they were talking a lot about critical race theory. And the reason for it was that they had been called racist a whole bunch of times. And I mean, in my opinion, with good reason. Donald Trump came into power, and when he said he was going to run for president, he said Mexican people are criminals. The people that Mexico is sending to America to immigrate are criminals. He took issue with Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem to protest police brutality. He didn't talk about the fact that there are racial discrepancies in police use of force. Black people are much more likely to have force used against them in an arrest than white people are. That wasn't what he cared about. What he cared about was the protest. Then we end up with George Floyd's death toward the end of his presidency, and he didn't really talk about the fact that there was police brutality. Along the way, he talked about the fact that some white supremacists were very fine people. So there was a lot of his administration being called racist. And he defended himself by saying, I'm not racist. Yes, there are racist people, but we don't have a race problem in America. To which critical race theory said, well, look at all this data we have. There are all these different outcomes based on race. And I say all of this for this reason. Critical race theory, once I've described it to you, is going to sound like just very standard sociology. It's saying, okay, we have these patterns, these outcome patterns. They are produced not by individuals, but by the way society is set up. And that's just standard, the sociological imagination. But because the Trump administration refused to talk about the fact that we do have these unequal racial outcomes based on all those metrics I was talking about before, they said anything that is talking about that is something that is creating more problems than it's solving. Therefore, we don't like critical race theory. Therefore, people in your life who were big Trump supporters, or even you wouldn't even have to be a big Trump supporter. You might just be a person who consumes conservative media. they've probably heard negative things about critical race theory. So what I'm going to tell you is not going to sound very scary. It's not even going to sound all that radical, to be honest with you. But be aware of the fact that you could end up in conversations. If you're talking about post-colonial theory in a conversation, people's eyes are just going to glaze over. If you're talking about critical race theory, it's possible you end up in a very unpleasant conversation. All right, so that's my disclaimer at the beginning of it. Here's what critical race theory basically says. I'm going to give you 5 tenets of it. I'm sorry, the first 2 are wrapped up in the first sentence here. The first sentence says, individual racism can't explain racial inequality. Tenet number 1, there is racial inequality. That's just provable by analysis of income by race or incarceration rates or health outcomes. That's just true. Second tenet is that individual racism can't explain that. We have to go to societal level explanations of it. It's not just a whole bunch of individual racist people doing things that creates this colossal wealth and income gap based on race. It's that our society is set up in a way that makes it easier for white people to accumulate wealth than it does for black people or brown people. There is a term that I need to give you with regard to this right now, and it is institutional discrimination. So institutional discrimination means racism that is built into a social institution. Social institution meaning a patterned way of meeting a need. So education is a patterned way of meeting the need of preparing the next generation to take over in the economy. The economy is a patterned way of meeting our needs for survival. That's what social institutions are. Institutional discrimination says we have got racism built into those things in a way that you could have completely not racist people running them and you're still going to produce racially unequal outcomes. So I'll give you an example of this. In about 1935, in the midst of the Great Depression, FDR gets passed a job insurance program. So basically unemployment insurance. You lose your job, you can get money from the government to help you so that you don't starve or lose your house. And once that law is on the books, if you are approved for job insurance, and there are some occupations that are and some occupations that aren't, but the government is not going to turn away a black person. If you are in an occupation that is covered by job insurance, awesome, you get money, just like a white person does. There's no racist person has an effect in that. But job insurance was set up to exclude domestic workers and to exclude farm workers. The reason for that was that the overwhelming majority of black people worked in those 2 occupations. And in order to get Southern lawmakers to vote for this bill, FDR had to say, okay, so we will exclude those people. That way you can have your racist making sure black people don't get money from the government, and we can still kind of get our way out of this Great Depression. Setting up that law is racist, right? Like they said, let's figure out a way of cutting black people out. Once the law is set up, every person who is working in the job insurance program, every government employee who is writing the checks and verifying people's information, they can all be not racist people, and we will still have a racist outcome of the program. That is what is meant by institutional discrimination. The racist outcome is not based on racist individuals, it's based on a system being built to benefit white people and disadvantage people of color. All right, so that's gross and that's horrible, and I'm sorry about that, but that's reality too. A third tenet of critical race theory is that racism is built into everyday life, and here we need to get to the term implicit racial bias. It shouldn't really be there. Think about implicit racial bias as being racism built into everyday life. So the idea here is that is that if you have been exposed to racist stereotypes, you are likely to not necessarily always act on it or just be a big racist bigot, but to act on it unconsciously when there are moments in which you have to react like that. Implicit racial bias has been found to be prevalent in, the last statistics I saw was about 3/4, 70-80% of white people harbor a pro-white, anti-black, or at least white above black attitude. But here's the thing, here's where it becomes not an individual issue, but a societal issue. About 50% of black people have also been found to have a pro-white bias. Where this could come into play, we were talking about police brutality just a little while ago. The decision to pull your gun and shoot is a decision that a police officer sometimes has to make like that. Does that person have a weapon? Is that person a threat to me? Well, if you have a pro-white, anti-black bias, you are more likely to react like that to pull your gun and shoot if that person is black than if that person is white. So this idea of implicit racial bias is what critical race theorists talk about racism being built into everyday life. All right, that's our third tenet. And this is kind of taking a while. So fourth, race is a social construction. It is not a fixed term. And we know this from the fact that the different states during slavery and during Jim Crow would have different ways of defining blackness. For some people, it was that you had to have, or I'm sorry, not for some people, for some states, it was if you had one black grandparent, then you were legally black. In other states, it was that you had to, if you were just 1/16 black, then you were legally black. So if I was a person who had a black, if I did not have a black grandparent, but I had a black great-grandparent, so I was 1/8 black, I could be white in one state, but black in another state, which had huge consequences for my life, right? We're talking about slavery and Jim Crow. I could have been put into slavery in one place, but not in another place. So this is what is meant by race as a social construction, and it changes over time. I think that's all I have to say about that. And the last is a term that we came to when we're talking about feminist theories, the idea of intersectionality. So the idea that critical race theory says it's not just about being of a racial minority, it is about, are you a racial minority and you're also a woman? Are you of a racial minority and you're also gay? Are you a racial minority and you're elderly or you are really young? All of those, that idea of intersectionality. Now, that's it. That's critical race theory. That is the thing that people were bent out of shape about at the end of 2020. And as I've described it to you, that is sociology. That is the idea that if you set up a society where you define the different races in different ways, first of all, if you say that there's race at all, and then you pour certain ideas into it, what we'd call stereotypes. Sociology says if you set up a society like that, of course you're going to end up with different, like, that's not, how's that controversial? Of course you're going to end up with different idea or different racial outcomes. So critical race theory, while it got a bad name in some circles at the end of 2020, it's really just sociology. It's just sociology that says, look, let's look at racial outcomes, and then let's try to understand how they could possibly have been created. They are particularly interested in this idea of institutional discrimination. How is race built into social institutions so that it creates so that it creates different racial outcomes based on race. All right, that's it for this one. In our next video, we will move on to, I believe, race as a social construction itself. So I will talk to you in that video.